Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, June 24th. Today is day 262 since October 7th. Over the weekend, hopes are fading fast for a ceasefire and hostage release deal in the Gaza Strip. We know that the Biden administration announced a US-backed deal this month, but the negotiations have stalled as Israel continued its brutal offensive in South Gaza. Over the weekend, Israeli airstrikes killed dozens of people in Gaza City, in the territory's north, and Israel's defense minister arrived in DC for official visits. OSHA put out a report that highlighted the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, deploring the repeated airstrikes on the Ashati refugee camp west of Gaza City. And the World Health Organization appealed for urgent medical evacuation outside of Gaza, stating that there are more than 10,000 critically ill and injured patients through all the possible crossings that need to be evacuated. The inability of humanitarian agencies to consistently and safely transport aid commodities from the Kerem Shalom crossing and the closure of the Rafah crossing are significantly undermining aid operations, according to OSHA, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. UNRWA, the UN Refugee Agency, their Commissioner General Felipe Lazzarini put out a statement that I received today, stating that UNRWA is staggering under the weight of relentless attacks. In Gaza, the agency has paid a terrible price, the most killed since the founding of the United Nations, with 193 UNRWA personnel having been killed in Gaza since October 7th. More than 180 installations have been damaged or destroyed, with at least 500 people seeking UN protection having been killed, and UNRWA personnel having been detained alongside of Gazans by the Israeli security forces, having reported mistreatment and torture during their time of being detained. According to UNRWA, they say our premises have been used for military purposes by both Israel and Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. UNRWA convoys have come under attack despite coordinated movement with Israeli authorities. Lazzarini described UNRWA as the backbone of humanitarian response in Gaza, and it cited examples of the role that UNRWA has played in the education of children in Gaza. He stated that there's more than 625,000 traumatized children, deeply traumatized children, who are living in rubble without access to education. 300,000 of them were enrolled in UNRWA schools, 290 schools that existed before the war. The Israeli Defense Forces say that they killed Mohammed Salah, who was a senior Hamas official in Gaza. He had a key role in producing the group's munitions. Medics in Gaza have said that they were working to step up the screening of young children for severe malnutrition. And during a situation assessment in Rafah, the IDF Chief of Staff, Halevi, said, quote, "We're definitely getting close to the point to where we can say we've dismantled the Hamas Rafah brigade," end quote. You will recall that just last week, the IDF spokesperson said Hamas cannot be eradicated because it's a political party and an ideology. The reconnected U.S. pier off the coast of Gaza cannot supply Palestinians with anywhere near the level of aid they need, according to the World Health Organization's head of the Eastern Mediterranean region. And the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that's OSHA, they issued the report saying that the breakdown of public order and safety is increasingly endangering humanitarian workers and aid operations in Gaza. So even if humanitarian aid is being allowed in, it's not able to be distributed to people who so desperately need it because of the breakdown of public order and safety. This has been created because there's a vacuum where there's no political authority that's been allowed to be established after Israel's invasion and after Hamas has been pushed out. According to the health ministry in Gaza, at least 37,626 Palestinians have been killed and at least 86,098 wounded since October 7th. The Hostage and Missing Family Forums in Israel released graphic footage from the Hamas kidnapping of Israeli hostages Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Or Levy, and Elia Cohen from the Nova Music Festival on the 7th of October at the request of their relatives. I've seen that footage. The Hirsch video is a serious indictment of the neglect that has been going on for 262 days. Hirsch, Elia, and Or were kidnapped alive, and that's how they should return to us today, said the forum. In his first interview to Israeli media since October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu told pro-government Channel 14 on Sunday night that he's willing to accept a partial deal with Hamas, during which some hostages held in Gaza would be released, and that he's committed to carrying on with the war after the pause in fighting. He added that he will not agree to any deal that involves Hamas's survival as the ruling party in Gaza. Hamas said that Netanyahu's comments prove that Israel rejects the U.S.'s proposal, that's Biden's proposal, that the U.S. drafted UN Security Council resolution to secure the release of hostages, adding that the demands of the Biden administration take a clear stance and stop supporting the war's continuation. What's clear from all of this is that both Netanyahu and the Israeli government and Sinwar and Hamas are both using the ongoing bombing and atrocities in Gaza for their own purposes and political ends. And who's caught in the middle? It's the innocent civilians in Gaza and the hostages that are remaining held there. What's certain is that it is time for there to be a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire, and that there's been enough political games at the expense of human lives, with only further death and destruction to show for it. It sounds like Israelis are also having a similar experience that many of us here in the United States have observed, where government leaders like Netanyahu say one thing and then act and do something completely different than what they've just said. There was a panel with Neva Wenkert, who's the mother of the hostage Omer Wenkert, and she said one day Netanyahu tells us there's a deal on the table, that the hostages will be released, and then the next day he says something different. How can I not go crazy? I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm a Zionist. But if my country does not save my son, we will have no future here. End quote. Following the backlash, Prime Minister Netanyahu said that he remains committed to the Israeli proposal laid out by President Biden for a deal. In other words, Israeli leaders will say what they need to say when they are publicly criticized. Netanyahu's saying he accepts the deal. The deal absolutely includes a permanent ceasefire. And Netanyahu has at the same time said he does not support a permanent ceasefire. We're hearing on one hand that the war is winding down in Gaza, and yet, the ground invasions have continued. Israel and the US, the Biden administration has rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's claim that it deliberately reduced arms shipments to Israel and has accused Netanyahu of political motivations. Senior Israel officials claimed that there's been a slowdown. It is a political showdown, but they have claimed that there's been a slowdown in recent weeks in the delivery of ammunition and replacement parts. The U.S. believes this is from bureaucratic and technical issues and not a deliberate decision. And actually, senior Israeli officials actually think that that's the case as well. But Netanyahu has said that this was deliberate, that this was intentional. The U.S. have been clear that this was not intentional. U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, said that the U.S. arms shipments keep coming to Israel and there's no change in American support of Israel. Over the last 48 hours, Hezbollah targeted northern Israel with anti-tank missile fire. The Rambam Medical Center in Haifa said that an Israeli was severely wounded from an anti-tank missile strike that happened Sunday evening in Metula. And the U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Brown, warned that an Israeli military offensive into Lebanon would risk an Iranian response. If that happened, if Israel attacks Hezbollah inside of Lebanon and a broader war is launched, the Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Brown, said, quote, "From our perspective, based on where our forces are, the short range between Lebanon and Israel, it's harder for us to be able to support them, being Israel, in the same way we did back in April." He's referring to when Iran launched a major missile and drone barrage at Israel in response to Israel having killed, the political operative in Syria. So that was Brown speaking to reporters. It's interesting that U.S. leaders have been saying that they would support Israel full stop in a war against Hezbollah, but here we see General Brown caveating and saying, hey, at least tactically, this would be much harder for us to do. This could be a warning to Israel in some way, shape, or form. Many in the U.S. had no idea that Israel, in my opinion, that the defense minister of Israel, Gallant, has been here in the U.S. and we've not been hearing protests. We've not been hearing about this. President Biden's top Mideast envoy Hochstein had meetings with Gallant to discuss the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah. Gallant said that Israel is preparing for every possibility militarily and politically. Gallant also met with the GOP Senator Lindsey Graham. And the Lebanese government led a tour for foreign diplomats and journalists at the Beirut airport. This is important because the Telegraph just reported that Hezbollah had been accumulating large storages of Iranian weapons there. But the Lebanese transportation minister said that all of the airports and ports are open and that diplomatic staff can inspect them. And so that the airport was open. The far-right finance minister Smotrich said that he intends to make the West Bank, quote, an integral part of the state of Israel, first on the ground and then through legislation. He added it's his life's mission to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, end quote. He called on Netanyahu to introduce sanctions against the Palestinian Authority in response to their recent international legal efforts against Israel. There also have been conversations about making the Al Jazeera law into permanent law. We'll talk about that more in the days ahead. It's currently only temporary. And reconciliation talks between rival Palestinian factions Hamas and Fatah that were due to be held in China this month have been delayed. There's not a new date set as of yet. Germany's foreign minister condemned an incident in which a Palestinian was tied to the hood of an Israeli Defense Forces vehicle in the northern West Bank city of Jenin over the weekend and called for clarification and consequences. There was also a violent clash that broke out between pro-Palestinian activists in the United States who blocked the entrance to an Orthodox synagogue in Los Angeles in a Pico Robertson neighborhood, and Jewish and pro-Israel supporters. Responding to the clashes, President Biden said, intimidating Jewish congregants is dangerous, unconscionable, anti-Semitic, and un-American. Americans have a right to peaceful protest, but blocking access to houses of worship and engaging in violence is never acceptable. Gunmen also attacked a synagogue and a church and a police post in Russia, and 15 police officers and several civilians were killed yesterday in what appeared to be a coordinated attack in the Republic of Dagestan. There was no immediate claim to responsibility, but Christian and Jewish religious sites in Dagestan have frequently been targeted by extremists. In 2018, a gunman had opened fire on churchgoers in a pre-Lenten festival there, killing 5 women. On October 29th, a mob stormed an airport in response to anti-Semitic calls on social media to block a passenger plane that had arrived from Israel. And video taken at the airport showed rioters waving Palestinian flags, breaking down doors, and trying to overturn a police car. More than 20 people were injured, including several police officers. Finally, you'll recall that several church denominations have had summer meetings or are having summer meetings and are voting on resolutions related to the situation in Gaza and Israel. The Unitarian Universalists at their General Assembly on Saturday voted 75% of the delegates for a permanent ceasefire, an end to U.S. military support for Israel, and to support the American Friends Service Committee Apartheid-Free Communities campaign. The resolution is known as an action of immediate witness in the Unitarian Universalist denomination. It was endorsed by 400 organizations and individuals. And the Episcopal Church at their General Convention met last week, and 3 of 7 resolutions related to Israel-Palestine passed. After hearty debate and 3 amendments, the House of Bishops passed Resolution D-013, condemning both the Hamas October 7th attack on Israel and Israel's retaliation against Hamas in Gaza. The resolution also asserts that peace can only come from a 2-state solution to the conflict. In addition to Palestinian statehood, the resolution calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages and other captives, and an increase of humanitarian aid to Gaza. It also calls upon the Washington, D.C.-based Office of Government Relations to advocate for Israel's military aid to be dependent on its participation in the peace process, and for sanctions against any nation that supports anti-Israel groups, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Denominations are having those conversations this summer. And my encouragement and our thought is just let's move beyond conversations and do all that we can to stop the killing and end the atrocities. We must do everything we can. Enough is enough. End the war on Gaza, bring the hostages home from Gaza, from Israeli prisons. Keep all of your efforts moving forward so that we might work together towards peace. Moose and I send our greetings and blessings to you in the name of Christ. Amen.